Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I want to introduce you tonight to Robert Earl Stewart, and he's the author of an interesting book. It's sort of a memoir called The Running Shaped Hole. And the book cover has got a donut with a hole in it, which is kind of interesting. We'll have to find out about that. Robert Earl Stewart has an MA from McGill University and spent 15 years as a newspaper reporter, photographer, and editor. His at times philosophical and slapdick memoir examines the life-altering effects running has on a man who has struggled to be a husband, a father, a son, and a writer. Sounds interesting. Robert, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Brian.
So tell me, why did you decide to write a memoir?
Well, I don't know if I really decided to do it other than I was tasked with doing it at one point. When I started running in 2013, early 2013, I was advised by runners more experienced than me to keep a running journal. A place to record your thoughts about various runs, your pace, your time, all those kind of statistics that runners can get really into. But being a poet and a writer and a journalist, someone who deals with things through story, I started, my running journal became a little more anecdotal. It wasn't just fact, numbers and data. Like if I ran into somebody I knew on a run, I would include this story. So the journal started becoming the chassis for a book. And without my knowing it, that wasn't the intention. And when, I was asked if I was interested in writing a memoir about running and my weight loss journey, I said, well, I think I've already kind of started. I have these notebooks right here. So it just kind of started happening, like a lot of running.
And what's the sort of the idea? It's your memoir, obviously, but is it a weight loss story, or is it a relationship story, or what?
I would say it's both. Over the course, when I was 39 years old, just before my 40th birthday, I weighed about 368 pounds. But
368 pounds.
That's right.
My gosh.
Yeah. And it could have been more. It was only after we bought a proper digital scale that was rated to 400 pounds that I was able to see how much weight I'd actually already lost. So the first day we had that scale, it said 368. So there was probably a period where I weighed closer to 400 pounds. And
today?
How much do I weigh today?
Yeah.
About 240.
So 148 pounds. Yeah. 128 pounds.
Yeah. It goes, one of the things about the weight loss journey in this book is that it's not a how to lose weight. I don't purport to be an expert or even pretend to be one. It's simply the story, the things that worked for me. I certainly don't, I don't endorse this as a weight loss program or, even a fitness regimen. It's more, that's how it became a memoir. It's more of a story. It's tied into my recovery from alcoholism. It's tied into how I became very sedentary when I was a grad student living in Montreal as an English major. You get into this lifestyle where you spend most of your time sitting and reading and writing. And if you have a real love of eating and food, and if you eat for the wrong reasons, like I did, like I ate for comfort and to make myself feel less self-conscious, even though I was extremely self-conscious about my weight, eating made me feel better about it. And that's obviously a really dangerous cycle. So but yeah, it's about how I fell in love, and it's about being a father, a husband, a son, a friend. It became a larger story than just the running.
And are there lessons learned in it?
Oh, there's lots of lessons learned. I learned a lot about, to be patient during weight loss. That's one thing that, when you ask me how much I weighed, like you could talk to me in a week and the number could be radically different. Some people gain and lose weight very fast. I happen to be one of those people. If in the summer when I'm running longer distances and it's hot, my weight could get down into the 220s. And, right now after Christmas and kind of the bacchanalia of food that happens, I'm up from where I was, say, 2 weeks before Christmas. So, and I have to be patient with myself. I have to understand that it's not, I'm not one of these people who is going to weigh the same amount for their entire adult life. I weigh myself every day, and from day to day, the number is up and down. Sometimes I'm happy, sometimes I'm less happy, but I try to accept myself and just know that I'm doing the right things to improve my health. And
tonight with Robert Earl Stewart. He's the author of The Running Shaped Hole. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Robert in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Robert Earl Stewart, who is the author of a fascinating book. And describe to me, if you could, the name of the book and why you came up with it.
Well, The Running Shaped Hole is a play on a line in the Pensée by Blaise Pascal, the philosopher. And it's described in the book how we arrived at this title. But back in 2011, and this is before my weight loss journey and running started, the British literary critic and television personality Christopher Hitchens died. And Hitchens was a very famous, very vocal, aggressive atheist. And an argument erupted on Facebook, where arguments tend to erupt, the argument was kind of concentrated within the Canadian literary scene, the poetry scene in particular. Someone that day had posted something on Facebook that said, reply with the greatest thing you learned from Christopher Hitchens. And of course, there's all these glowing things that people have learned from Christopher Hitchens. And I weighed in with, I learned that it is possible to be a brilliant literary critic, but also be completely wrong about the nature of faith, spirituality, God, all those things. And of course, it turned into a rather unpleasant brawl on Facebook with people renouncing my previous books of poetry. There's people I've never spoken to again. That was, it's been 11 years. And a friend of mine, Martin Deck, who's a bookseller here in Windsor, back-channeled me on Facebook and said something about, don't worry about it, Bob. These people don't know that the hole is God-shaped. And I wrote it down in a notebook. I was like, wow, Martin's a really profound guy. That's a wonderful thing that he just said there. And years later, of course, I'm looking for a title for this book that I've written about running, and how running has become this meditative place where I kind of connect with a more spiritual side of myself. And I was like, what was that thing Martin said that time when Christopher Hitchens died? He said something about there's a God-shaped hole inside of everyone, and people need to recognize sometimes that that's what they're looking for. And I went back through that notebook and I found that quote from my friend Martin, and I texted him, and I said, hey, I think I found a great title for my book. It's something you said about a God-shaped hole. And he said, well, that wasn't me. That was Blaise Pascal, like 300 or 400 years ago. I was So I had to go back and read my Pascal, obviously. And the quote from Pascal is forms the epigraph to the book. It's about sometimes, or, in Pascal's understanding of it, and maybe in my understanding of it, if you're searching for something, if you feel lost, if you are out of sorts with yourself, out of step with your fellows, that hole that you need to fill might have a spiritual component to it.
That's very profound.
We just changed it to running shapes. So.
But then the picture on the book cover is of a donut with a bite out of it. And I guess I always thought the really special part of the donut was the hole in the middle, but now you're making two holes, one that's the hole in the middle plus a bite hole. Why? Which is the God-shaped hole there?
Well, I guess for me, when it comes to eating, I would say that the hole in the middle is the least important part of the donut because there's nothing there to eat. I didn't choose the donut. Laura Boyle, who is the book designer, the cover designer at Dundurn Press, she came up with that. And when I saw it, when she sent me the designs for back in the summer it was, I knew that we'd lit on the right thing. I knew that although I hadn't been thinking of a donut, that she had found the right image for the book. We were conscious of avoiding running imagery on the cover. It's not a sports book. I don't ever wanted it to be marketed as purely a book about athletics or running as a sport. I think it can be cross-indexed that way, but I think in its heart, that's not what the book is about. So we wanted to avoid the running imagery that seems to be ubiquitous on the cover of running books. And I said to Laura when I saw this donut, I said, the only thing, and it's got a couple of bites out of it. It's a very Homer Simpson-esque looking donut with like the pink or purple icing with sprinkles on it. And there's a couple of bites out of it. And I said, the only thing more Robert Earl Stewart than a donut with two bites out of it is, no donut whatsoever, that I've eaten the donut. And when it should be there on the cover, I couldn't resist and eat it. So, the hole, the symbolism of the hole in the donut, I think is also, clever and kind of very subtle and profound in its own way. So the whole is, when you're talking about me and my understanding of God is very profound. But if you're talking purely about donuts, it's yes, there it is. If you're talking purely about donuts, the whole is it's a void, it's a lack. So, and I had a lack that I needed to fill. So,
and that lack, that void that you needed to fill, running filled it?
Running helped fill it. Running helped me. When I started running, I had been sober from alcohol and drugs for 10 years. And although lots of things had improved in my life, my relationships with people, my relationships, I was able to have a 15-year newspaper career. I was a father several times over. So all these things were improving, except my physical health with my weight and my eating. And the running helped me connect in sobriety with that thing that, although I had faith, I wasn't 100% there yet. And running became a meditation for me. I talk a lot in the book about running as meditation. And when I'm running, when you're driving on a highway, this is the analogy I use. And a lot of us here in this part of the world will think of the 401. And you're driving on the 401, and suddenly you realize that you have no recollections or memories of the last 20 minutes, 45 minutes. Nothing bad has happened. You've probably been driving just perfectly. but you all of a sudden are like, wow, I've been driving a car. Where have I been? Like, I've just been like in the ozone thinking. And that's kind of what running is like. When I have a really good run, when I return home from the run, sometimes I even have a hard time knowing where I was until I upload the data from my GPS watch, and then can say, oh yeah, I did turn down that street and I did run for 2 kilometers, south, and then turn left, So you kind of disappear. And it's not about like thinking about work or thinking about family, or even thinking about writing. It's kind of just letting the mind be free. And in that freedom, I find a lot of peace. I get away from the things that I tend to obsessively think about, like work, like worries, like all the that a parent or someone would worry about. So running helps me be free, sometimes, however briefly, of those things.
Fascinating. I can have to get back into running, I think. What was the hardest part, or the hardest scene to write in the book, and what was the easiest?
The hardest is the very opening scene of the book. The scene opens in a hospital room when my mother, at 58 years old, was dying of a virus, not this virus, a virus called CMV, which is one of the hospital viruses like MRSA or C. difficile, Norwalk, all those staph, all those viruses. But CMV is kind of considered, the one you really don't want to get. And my mother was a nurse, and she, it just happened, and it killed her. And while she was lying there, dying, she asked me to, she wanted me to be healthy, and she could barely speak. She was so ill. And she said, please do something about your weight. I wasn't even 30 when this is in 2006. Well, I was in my mid 30s at that point. And I said, no. And my father is sitting there crying. And I just said, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy. I got work. I got the kids. I got a life to live. I got writing to do. I don't have time to lose weight. And I denied my dying mother this wish that I would, at least I didn't even, in the book, I talk about, I could have just lied to her and said, okay, Mom, and let her have some peace. I was bold, not even bold. I was, boorish enough to say no. And writing that scene and, having to, from memory, recreate some of the dialogue with my father that happened in that scene, where I say in the book, everyone knows the look of on their father's face and the sound their father makes when they're disgusted with you. And I know that from that, I know that look, and that just kind of that exasperated head shaking, like, oh, this kid, and I was a kid. I was still immature in a lot of ways at that point in my life. So even though I was 32, I think, at that point.
Why did you include the scene in the book?
Because it's the promise that I eventually make good on. The book is dedicated to my mother and my father for finally, at years after my mother's death, getting to a point in my life where I was ready to take my dying mother's advice and to fulfill that promise. And I'm almost 400 pounds. I am running out of breath just talking to people. And I was working at a newspaper at the time. I was always sitting at a desk, which is not good, but always talking on the phone. And I would be talking to people on the phone, and I'd be taking these big heaving, catch-up breaths that I would take if I was like sprinting down the street right now at the end of the sprint. And my coworkers would be looking at me and like, is everything okay? And I'd be looking at them like, yeah, why? And they're like, well, you're breathing really heavy and you're just talking on the phone. And other people started to notice this too happening when I would, just be talking to people, in public. So there were all these indicators that something needed to change. And
what was the easiest part to write?
The easiest part, I think, to write was when the the culminating event of the book was always intended to be my running of the Detroit Free Press Half Marathon, or the marathon, or the international half, where relay, where 5 people run, or the international full relay, where 5 runners run the relay, because the Detroit marathon takes place in Windsor and Detroit. You cross the border twice. So there was twice I was supposed to be running it. Twice things intervened in my life that prevented me from running. So finally, on the 3rd try in 2015, I did run the Detroit Free Press Half Marathon. And there's a full chapter in the book that basically takes you through that day, from the time we wake up as a family at, I think it was 3 a.m. To get ready, to get in the van, to drive across the border to Detroit, to, get to the starting line. And literally I take the reader from, the starting line in downtown Detroit, over the Ambassador Bridge, back through Windsor, back through the tunnel into Detroit. So it's a longer chapter, but it was very easy to write, because those events of that day, that morning, are, really emblazoned in my memory. A lot of really strong images, a lot of kind of funny things happened along the route. It was kind of a real, marathons and half marathons are very joyous occasions. There's musicians on the street playing for free. There's people in neighborhoods, if you run through a neighborhood, coming out on their porch and banging pots and pans together. And it's a festival. There's really 27,000 runners and probably 27,000 spectators. So it's a huge event.
There's an incredible feeling when you're running in that incredible crowd of people, isn't there? Whether it be a 10K or a half marathon or a marathon.
Yeah. And you are the athlete that day, regardless of whether you're one of the elite runners who are coming from somewhere internationally to try to actually win, a marathon, or if you're a guy like me who's in Start Corral L, who has a expected finish time of around like 2 hours and 40 minutes. And, as you're just as important to the spectators and to the other runners as those elite runners. And I think that's one of the things that is often a misconception about running, is that there's an elitism to it. And I've always found the running community to be very accepting of all different levels of runner, from the rank beginner to the super experienced ultra runner, and also about body type and body shape and weight, which is something I'm very conscious of in the book. Is there is no ideal body type to be a runner. Obviously, elite Olympic athletes are going to have certain characteristics physically, but the rest of us, it's all shapes and sizes.
We're chatting tonight with Robert Earl Stewart. He is the author of a book called The Running Shaped Hole, a memoir. Robert, where can people pick up the book if they're interested?
Well, the book's going to be available at bookstores large and small across the country, really around wherever good books are sold. And you can order it online. There's the ebook option as well. It's published by Dunder Press.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Robert Earl Stewart in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Robert Earl Stewart. He is the author of a book called The Running Shaped Hole, and it's a fascinating memoir about his his experience running. And Robert, when you started, were you almost 400 pounds, 348 pounds, you said?
By the time I started running, I started walking. And I think that's an important point to make. When I decided that something had to change, the first thing I did is go for a walk around a neighborhood park here, Willistead Park here in Windsor. And, that walk that day was about, I think I say in the book, it's about 2.2 kilometers, twice around the park. And I was more exhausted that day after that walk than I was yesterday when I ran 9 kilometers in the freezing cold. So I started walking and lost about 60 pounds leading up to
just from walking.
Just from walking in a rather, and modifying my diet heavily and tracking everything I ate. I still track what I eat on an app on my phone all the time. So that was leading up to I had to go for a stress test at a cardiologist's office. So I wanted to be I didn't want to fail another one of those. I'd had one in the past. I didn't do well. And I was more determined than ever to at least try to impress the doctor. Like as a good student and an academic, I just wanted to impress somebody. Someone give me a better mark, give me a B+ rather than an F. And so when I lost that 60 pounds and I went to the cardiologist, and he said that, my heart was fine, luckily. I hadn't done any damage to my heart. I was just obese and, out of condition, not in good shape. But he said, you should be able to work your heart as hard as you need to get healthy. And that night when I went for my walk, I was walking every day, sometimes 8-10 kilometers. When I went for my walk, I mixed in about 200 meters of running, and I was terrified. I didn't know how this was going to turn out. I thought they might find me lying in a ditch, but I ran 200 meters and survived. And the next day I mixed in, a little bit more, maybe 300 meters. And then a week or so later, it was a full kilometer. And then, soon I was running, 10, 12, 16 kilometers. Then it was, half marathons and trail runs. And, so I started with walking.
It's got to be pretty bad on your joints if you're over 300 pounds running, isn't it?
Well, my joints have never felt better, nothing is more, I think there's also how you feel about your joints also, I think, has a lot to do with how you're feeling, mentally. When I weighed that, 368 pounds, I couldn't get up off the floor. Our kids were a lot younger then. And if I was down on the floor doing something with them, I had to grab onto a piece of furniture and haul myself back up to my feet. And there was a lot, it hurt. It physically hurt to do so. Today I'll take the aches and pains of a long run where I take a couple Motrin when I get home and do some stretching, and then have a warm shower and maybe put some liniment on my ankle or my hip over the tremendous pain of being overweight. There's a difference between that good kind of muscle fatigue and dangerous, where your body can't even handle its own weight.
So you said that you were immature.
Mm-hmm.
You said that you were an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
You said that you were overweight.
Mm-hmm.
Is running therapy?
This is an interesting question. You'll see a lot of t-shirts and coffee mugs and hats and memes about running that will make, kind of lighthearted humor of running is my therapy, or running's cheaper than psychoanalysis, which is true. And we all laugh at that because I think if you're a runner, a lot of runners, the physical benefits are one thing, but a lot of runners realize that the real benefit is in the head. And the barriers are in the head. all the things you think are a barrier to running are also mental, I believe. So is running therapy? I think it can be part of a therapeutic solution for people who are suffering from various physical and mental health issues. But I caution against thinking that it's the whole solution to someone who may actually need more help from from qualified professionals, which I have also sought for various things over the years. So I make sure in the book to make that very clear that this is not a prescription for your health. It's what worked for me. It's the story of what worked for me, but it's not a how-to book.
What got you out of the alcoholism?
Well, when I was 29, it was fear. the fear that I was, and a doctor's diagnosis, basically, that I was in the early stages of liver disease at 29. There was a mounting, list of reasons and evidence that alcohol was having a negative impact on everything that I did, from my marriage and my professional life to just my interaction with people in general, and most devastatingly, what I thought about myself. I sought help, and I found a community of people who were seeking the same solution that I was seeking. So I continue to cling to that today.
Sounds like you've really gone through a transformation. Are you still in the news?
In the news business?
Yes.
No, I left newspapers, and that's actually included in the story as well. In 2014, I worked for, I started at the Windsor Star in 2000, sorry. And then I worked for some local community newspapers that were eventually purchased up by Post Media, who also owned the Star, etc. So I worked in their community newspaper division for over 10 years. And I was when you're working in community news, you are the editor, you're the reporter, you're the guy who answers the phone, you're the guy who takes the pictures, you're the guy who goes to the town council meetings. So you do everything. You do sports, you do weather, you do agriculture, you do labor. So I did love that job, but the newspaper industry, as I'm sure you and listeners are aware, is not what it was even 10 years ago. And in 2014, I kind of saw the writing on the wall. I wasn't happy. My wife knew I wasn't happy. She actually she sat me down one day and said, you got this book to write. You have other books you want to write. And maybe it's time that you move on from journalism. And I agreed, and I didn't argue with her. I handed in my resignation, and yes, there's things about journalism that I miss. I still have lots of friends in the local journalism scene, but ultimately it was the right decision. Those Post Media shuttered those newspapers last year. So,
any chance you could read something from your book for us?
I can. How much of a something would you like to hear?
Well, a minute or two.
Okay. Well, I will read a part about, maybe some of your listeners are familiar with Joseph Heller's great novel, Catch-22. And there's a part in the book where I riff on kind of the maddening dialogue and kind of cyclical logic that basically is a catch-22. Catch-22 refers to a kind of cyclical thinking pattern, like military doublespeak. And I got caught in one of these when it came to a running injury I had. I had an IT band issue, which is a band of muscular tissue or connective tissue that runs basically from your hip to your knee along the outside of your leg. And it's a very, very common running issue. And I've had repeated bouts of this. And this one time well, I'll just read the little section here. So it says, the pain on that night gave me a moment of clarity. I finally had the ability to honestly and realistically appraise the situation and act on what I saw. The pain was mental. It was emotional. It was in my head and heart. It stopped being about mileage and pace, and it suddenly was all about how great I felt when I was running. And when I was running in pain, it was just a misguided attempt to fill up that running-shaped hole. The whole scenario reminded me of that part in Catch-22 when Yossarian and Doc Danica are discussing how pilots like Yossarian's friend Orr can be grounded and prevented from flying any more missions. Their discussion of the novel's central paradox, like almost every bit of dialogue in Joseph Heller's monumental novel about bomber pilots on the Mediterranean island of Pianosa during the Second World War, is absolutely brilliant and maddening. All of the bomber pilots on Pianosa, Doc explains to Yossarian, are certifiably crazy and as such cannot fly any more missions. But he cannot ground them until they ask to be grounded. However, as soon as they ask to be grounded, expressing rational concern for their own safety and well-being, they are deemed sane, and Doc can no longer ground them. I was in a similar situation. I needed running in my life because it was the thing that helped me work things out in my head. Not being able to run made running become the thing in my head that needed to be worked out. So I was willing to run and risk further injury, pain, and mental turmoil just for a day or so of peace. Put another, more Heller-esque way, a concern for one's own health and safety in the face of injuries that were real and immediate was the process of a rational mind. I was sane and needed to stop running. All I had to do was admit it. And as soon as I did and stopped running, I would be crazy and I would have to run. I would be crazy to go on more runs and sane if I didn't. But if I was crazy, I had to go running. If I ran, I was crazy and shouldn't run. But if I didn't run, I was crazy and had to.
Robert Earl Stewart, the author of The Running-Shaped Hole. Fascinating. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Robert Earl Stewart. He is the author of a book called The Running-Shaped Hole, a memoir. And Robert, you've given us really quite an interesting description of your life, that you were an alcoholic, that you put on a lot of weight, that you didn't give your mother a satisfactory answer on her deathbed to her request that you get healthy, that you enjoyed your newspaper job, but were frustrated that you didn't get to become an author. And so therefore you gave that up so that you could start writing. And it seems like you've really come into your own now. And it seems like this meditative state that you get into when you're running has been the secret. But you also express that there's a whole spiritual nature to it. And the book and your title is all about this, the God-shaped hole. Tell us a little bit more about how you've come to terms with spiritualism through your running.
At a very young age, about 6 or 7, I became very angry. My parents, they got married in the late 60s, at that time of rebellion, things like that. My mother was raised in the Salvation Army. My father's family came out of the woods of Quebec to Windsor and had no kind of spiritual connection, no affiliation. My mother's family, who I love them all dearly, it was a different time. They at first rejected my father and didn't think that my parents should marry because he was not in this. Not only was he not in the Salvation Army, he was not baptized. Somehow, when I was about 6 or 7 years old, just in a conversation with my mom, I can picture it clearly standing in the kitchen of the home I grew up in. And I know she thought she was being honest and telling me what I wanted to know. She told me about that situation and how hard that had been for her and for my father. And, you know, I think I was too young for that. I didn't know how to process that. Basically, I was a child, and rather than, you know, play the tape forward and see how everything worked out, you know, people can be wrong. My grandparents were wrong, but I think in the end they came to love my father very much. But I didn't see it that way. I just became very hard-hearted and very turned off by anything to do with God, religion, spirituality, church, faith. All those things were confused in my head. Those are different. All those things are different. And I just saw it as one thing that I completely rejected. And I became, as I became, a teenager and, a university student with, who liked to drink, I became like a very vocal, aggressive kind of atheist. It became part of my personality. The persona that I wanted to project was someone who had this huge chip on his shoulder about all these things. The thing I wasn't saying to anyone and barely admitting to myself is that it was a persona. It was an act that I was projecting, because I'd even taken undergraduate courses in philosophy, hoping that the professors would be able to give me better arguments against the existence of some kind of higher power, spiritual deity. All I got from these people was startlingly and embarrassingly was that the opposite was true, that there's all kinds of spiritual evidence and that there is something, and it can't be proven. It's not like proving a mathematical formula. It's not like proving the existence of some kind of corporeal thing in the universe. It's a matter of faith, and faith is a different thing. So inside, I knew that there was something there, that hole, the God-shaped hole, but I was embarrassed. And my wife at one point was almost going to be a nun. The woman I married at one point in her life had a decision to make of whether she wanted to go to regular old high school or go to the convent. And through some circumstances in her family moving from Halifax to Windsor, she decided not to go into the convent. So here I am, married to someone who's got a very deep personal faith, and I'm cruising for arguments all the time with people about religion and faith and God, and just ready to attack all the time. And I damaged some relationships with people and insulted some people and made things uncomfortable at dinner parties and things like that. But the person I was really hurting was myself, always. The real damage was being done inside of me, because it was a lie. I was refusing to just kind of surrender and just say, I'm done with this persona. I don't need to impress people anymore. I don't need to flex my undergrad all the time, as I like to say. I don't need to prove that I'm the smartest guy in the room. And you come to that confrontation point, especially with when you're trying to live a sober life, that I came to a very peaceful and serene kind of understanding of who my God is and how I believe in that God.
So Robert, has your God-shaped hole been filled?
Yes. It's not like a constant. It's not like it's not like you can, I'm done with that, move on to the next project. It's something you work on every day. You have to maintain that contact, with your higher power, and running is one of the ways I do that. But there's other more traditional styles of meditation, which I also engage in, and prayer, and even just reading, talking to other people is a real way to stay engaged. They say that God works through people, and I believe that very much.
Robert Earl Stewart, I think God worked through you today. Thank you very much. The author of The Running Shaped Hole, a memoir that you can get at bookstores or online. Really appreciate you joining us today and sharing with us a little bit about your story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me.
That's our show for tonight. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Windsor, at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and video casts are available on briancrombie.com. My videos are on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And my podcasts are on Apple, Audible, and Speakeasy Podcasts. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Robert. Good night, everybody.